For half a century, a mysterious steel safe sat in the corner of Roy Acuff's old Nashville home. Dust collected, paint peeled, and rumors swirled. Acuff, the king of country music, never spoke publicly about its contents, and even close friends claimed they didn't know. When he died in 1992, the safe was quietly moved into storage, forgotten by all but a handful of trusted family members. But in 2025, while preparing an exhibit for the Country Music Hall of Fame, workers were given the green light to finally open it. What they found inside was not just a time capsule, but a collection of items that could rewrite chapters of country music history. And as each layer was revealed, the story grew stranger, more personal, and far more emotional than anyone expected. Before we get to the moment the safe was opened, you have to understand the man who locked it in the first place. Roy Acuff wasn't just another country star. He was the heartbeat of the Grand Ole Opry. Born in Maynardville, Tennessee, in 1903, he grew from a small-town boy to one of the most influential figures in American music. His voice carried the pain and pride of rural America, and his songs like The Great Speckled Bird and Wabash Cannonball became anthems that still echo through the halls of the Opry House. But Acuff was more than a performer. He was a businessman, a publisher, and a mentor, shaping the careers of countless artists. He co-founded Acuff Rose Music, the first country music publishing company in Nashville, helping the genre grow from a niche art form into a worldwide industry. Yet, for all his public influence, Roy was intensely private about certain parts of his life. Those who worked with him spoke of a man who kept mementos, letters, and personal notes hidden away. Some believed he did so out of humility. Others thought it was to protect people's reputations in an industry where rumors could ruin lives. The safe in question, according to whispers among Opry staff, was purchased sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s. It was small enough to fit in a study, but heavy enough that moving it required at least 4 men. And while Acuff wasn't known for being secretive with his friends, whenever the topic of that safe came up, he would simply smile and change the subject. Family members recall seeing him put envelopes inside, but never take anything out. Musicians who visited his home remember catching a glimpse of it, but never dared to ask what was inside. Over time, the safe became part of the house's scenery, a silent, unspoken fixture in the life of a man whose career touched millions. And so, when Acuff passed away, the safe's mystery passed with him, at least for a while. After Roy Acuff's death in 1992, his home became a monument to his life, filled with instruments, photographs, and countless memories. The safe, however, remained an enigma. In the early years, his closest relatives debated whether to open it, but the consensus was always the same: not yet. Out of respect for Roy's memory, no one wanted to disturb whatever he had chosen to lock away. The safe was eventually moved into a secure storage area owned by the family, tucked into the back of a climate-controlled room. For decades, it sat there, surrounded by boxes of stage costumes, reel-to-reel tapes, and framed posters from Acuff's long career. The few who had access to the storage space would occasionally dust the safe's surface, but no one tried to open it. Over the years, whispers about its possible contents spread among Opry veterans. Some believed it contained handwritten song lyrics to never-before-heard Acuff originals. Others swore it held early business agreements between Acuff Rose and legendary performers like Hank Williams, Roy Orbison, or the Everly Brothers. The more imaginative rumors hinted at scandal, secret love letters, confidential documents, or even money hidden away for unknown reasons. By the 2000s, the safe had taken on a near-mythical status, among country music insiders. It became one of those stories you'd hear backstage at the Opry, spoken with a grin and a shake of the head. One day, they'll open that thing, and who knows what they'll find. Yet, no one pushed to make it happen. Then, in 2024, a new exhibit was planned for the Country Music Hall of Fame, one that would spotlight never-before-seen artifacts from Roy Acuff's personal life. As curators dug through his archives, they stumbled across the storage room and the safe. This time, the reaction was different. With family approval, the Hall of Fame team decided it was time. The arrangements were made for early 2025, and a small group was selected to be present when the safe's doors swung open for the first time in over 50 years. None of them could have imagined the mix of joy, sorrow, and shock that would follow. It happened on a cold January morning in 2025, inside a quiet back room of the Country Music Hall of Fame. The safe, now positioned on a sturdy steel table, looked smaller than the legends surrounding it, but its weight was almost symbolic. Standing around it were 3 Hall of Fame curators, 2 members of the Acuff family, a photographer, and a locksmith who had been vetted for the job. The atmosphere was hushed, almost reverent, as though they were about to open a time capsule from another century, which, in a way, they were. The locksmith, a veteran with decades of experience, ran his hands over the cool metal surface before leaning in to examine the locking mechanism. "They don't make 'em like this anymore," he murmured. The dial was worn smooth in spots, likely from Roy's own fingers spinning it all those years ago. After some debate, it was decided not to drill the safe unless absolutely necessary. They wanted to keep it intact, preserving every piece of history it carried. The locksmith worked slowly, listening intently to the faint clicks inside as the room stayed completely silent. It took almost 45 minutes before he finally exhaled, turned the handle, and said the words everyone had been waiting for. "It's open." The heavy door swung outward with a metallic groan, releasing a faint scent of aged paper and cedar. Inside were several neat stacks of envelopes, a small wooden box, and what looked like a rolled-up oilcloth tied with twine. The curators exchanged glances. This was already far more than they dared hope for. The family members leaned in, eyes wide. The first envelope was labeled in neat cursive handwriting, "To be opened after I'm gone." It was dated 1953, decades before Roy's passing. Beneath it, more envelopes carried years written across them like milestones in his life. The wooden box rattled slightly when lifted, and the oilcloth felt heavy, something metallic inside. One curator whispered, "We need to document each step." And so the photographer began capturing every detail before a single seal was broken. No one in the room knew it yet, but the contents would reveal stories Roy Acuff had never told, and truths that could change how fans remembered him forever. The first envelope, dated 1953 and marked "To be opened after I'm gone," was opened with careful hands. Inside was a neatly folded letter written in Roy Acuff's unmistakable handwriting. His words were direct, almost conversational, as if he had anticipated speaking to whoever found it decades later. He began by explaining that the items in the safe were pieces of my life I could never share while I was living. He hinted at promises made, debts owed, not just in money, but in loyalty, and the need to protect certain people from the weight of public eyes. As the curators read aloud, the room fell silent. The letter mentioned names, some long gone, others still recognizable in the country music world. There was a reference to a young singer he had once helped quietly escape a ruinous contract, using his own money and influence without ever taking credit. Another passage described his concern over certain business dealings in the early days of Acuff Rose, noting that some agreements were made on nothing more than a handshake and trust, and that the physical proof of those dealings was inside the safe. Beneath that letter were more envelopes, each from a different decade. The ones from the 1960s included personal notes to his late wife Mildred, written during long tours. They were tender, filled with longing, and painted a picture of a man who carried deep loneliness beneath his public charm. One note even described a night when Roy nearly walked away from the Opry for good after feeling the industry was changing too fast, leaving behind the heart and soul he'd built his career on. Then came an envelope from the early 1970s, containing an unsigned contract that had never been made public. An agreement between Acuff Rose Music and a then unknown songwriter whose work would go on to define an era. The name on that paper made one curator whisper, "Oh my God." It was a deal that, had it been revealed, might have rewritten the origin story of several famous hits. By the time the last letter was placed back into its sleeve, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. This wasn't just nostalgia. This was a revelation. And they still hadn't touched the wooden box or the oilcloth. The small wooden box sat on the table like it was guarding something precious. Darkened with age, its surface bore tiny scratches, the kind that only come from years of being handled. A faint smell of cedar and tobacco clung to it, as if it had absorbed decades of Roy Acuff's world. The lid was secured by a tiny brass latch, and when it clicked open, the sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the room. Inside, resting on a layer of faded velvet, was a collection of personal keepsakes that felt almost too intimate to touch. The first item was a harmonica, worn and tarnished, its once shiny surface dulled by countless performances. Tucked beneath it was a folded scrap of paper with a set list from an early Opry show. Every song title written in Roy's handwriting, complete with scribbled notes about key changes and tempo. Next to it lay a small silver locket containing two miniature photographs, one of Mildred, his beloved wife, and another of a young man in a military uniform, later identified as a cousin who had died in World War II. There was also a strange-looking backstage pass from 1944, issued during a USO tour to entertain American troops. Faded but still legible, it was stamped with military insignia and Roy's name. Perhaps the most startling item was a thick gold ring, engraved inside with the initials of a fellow Opry performer, someone Roy had reportedly clashed with in later years. No one knew they had once shared such a personal token. At the very bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was an old reel of audio tape labeled simply, "Acuff, Private." Its meaning was unclear, but the handwriting matched the early 1950s. The family immediately requested it be digitized for preservation, though they were warned that old tape could be fragile and might not survive playback. The weight of the wooden box's contents wasn't in gold or gems, it was in memories, connections, and personal history. These were not the kind of treasures you could sell. They were the kind you protected. And yet, as revealing as the box had been, the oilcloth bundle still sat untouched on the table, promising one last, possibly explosive discovery. The oilcloth bundle was heavier than it looked, its coarse surface stiff from decades of storage. Dust clung to the creases, and the twine holding it shut had darkened with age. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward at the same time as one of the curators slowly untied the knot. The fabric opened with a faint crackle, revealing the metallic glint of something old. And immediately, the air in the room seemed to change. Inside was a stack of objects wrapped in layers of yellowed newspaper from 1951. The topmost item was a pistol, a small nickel-plated revolver with a pearl grip, its metal dulled but still gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. Tucked beneath it was a folded piece of stationery in Roy's hand. The note explained that the revolver had been a gift from a friend in the business, a performer whose name, when read aloud, drew audible gasps. It wasn't just any friend. It was a figure shrouded in one of the Opry's most enduring controversies. A man whose abrupt departure from the stage in the 1940s had never been fully explained. Acuff wrote that the gun had been given to him in gratitude for a kindness shown, and hinted at a late-night incident that had been handled quietly, for everyone's sake. The next layer of the bundle revealed something even more startling: a collection of folded telegrams, some from high-ranking political figures, others from soldiers stationed overseas. Many of them thanked Acuff for his music during World War II, crediting his songs with keeping spirits alive in dark times. But among them was one telegram stamped "Private" in red ink, sent from Washington, D.C. in 1943, that referred to a private meeting between Roy Acuff and a senior government official. The subject was never specified, but the tone implied it had been important enough to remain off the record. Beneath the telegrams lay a series of photographs no one had seen before. Black and white, slightly curled at the edges, they showed Roy in informal settings, fishing with soldiers in uniform, laughing with a small group of musicians backstage, and in one, standing with his arm around a man whose face had been carefully scratched out. That last picture drew a long silence in the room. At the very bottom of the bundle was perhaps the most shocking discovery of all. A sealed manila envelope, its flap glued shut, and the words, "Only for the right moment," written in Roy's hand. It was dated 1955. Family members hesitated, debating whether to open it immediately or preserve its secrecy a little longer. In the end, they agreed to wait until the other discoveries were catalogued. But even without opening it, the envelope's weight in the palm hinted that it wasn't just paper inside. Whatever it was, it had been locked away for over half a century for a reason. And as the oilcloth was folded back up, the group realized the safe had yielded far more than just mementos. It had pulled back the curtain on hidden chapters of country music, and perhaps even American history, that the public had never been meant to see. The reel of audio tape from the wooden box had been sent to a specialist lab overnight. By the following afternoon, the group reconvened in a small soundproof room at the Country Music Hall of Fame. The reel-to-reel machine sat ready, the brown tape threaded carefully through its spindles. The technician gave a brief warning. The tape was fragile, over 70 years old, and there was no guarantee it would survive the playback. Still, the family gave the nod to proceed. As the reels began to turn, the faint hiss of static filled the room, followed by the unmistakable drawl of Roy Acuff's voice. But this wasn't a performance. His tone was quieter, more reflective, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "If you're hearing this," he began, "then I'm long gone, and maybe that's the way it should be." What followed was an unscripted, candid monologue unlike anything the public had ever heard from the king of country music. He spoke about the loneliness of life on the road, the strain fame placed on his marriage, and the nights he questioned whether his music still mattered. At one point, he paused for a long stretch before saying, "There are things about this business folks don't see. Things I've kept to myself, because the truth wouldn't have done anyone any good." He mentioned moments of betrayal from people he had trusted, but never named names. He spoke of promises kept, debts repaid quietly, and friendships tested by the pressures of the spotlight. Then his voice shifted, warmer, as he recounted memories of soldiers requesting Wabash Cannonball in faraway barracks, of mothers writing to say his songs gave them hope while their sons were overseas, of the first time he heard a crowd sing his lyrics back to him. The final minutes of the tape grew almost poetic. "If music is the only thing I leave behind, I hope it's enough. But if you found the safe, well, then maybe I left behind more than I thought." As the tape clicked to an end, no one spoke for several seconds. It was as if Roy had stepped into the room decades after his death and pulled everyone into his confidence. But one mystery still loomed: the sealed manila envelope from 1955. And it was finally time to decide whether it would remain closed or reveal its last secret. They gathered around the table once more, the sealed manila envelope from 1955 at the center, like a final chord waiting to resolve. A family member held it first, weighing its quiet significance, then passed it to the lead curator. No one reached for scissors. Instead, with the deliberate care of someone turning a page older than themselves, the curator slid a flat blade beneath the flap and lifted. Inside lay three things: a folded letter, a slim leather-bound notebook, and a small cloth pouch tied with blue thread. The letter came first. Written in Roy's steady hand, it began without pleasantries. "If you're here, it means the music survived me." "Good. Now, let me tell you what mattered when the lights were off." He explained that he'd placed in this envelope the pieces he couldn't trust to time or to rumor. He asked that any public release be done in the spirit of kindness, not sensationalism, noting that a man's legacy is not a trophy, but a tune. Sing it wrong, and you change the song. The notebook revealed why he'd been so protective. Inside were rough drafts of lyrics and fragments of melodies dated across the early and mid-1950s, with marginal notes about friends and collaborators, some famous, some forgotten. Many pages were simply seeds, verses crossed out, refrains redirected, but a handful were stunners. A fully formed lyric that read like a prayer for returning soldiers, a waltz about a marriage learning to forgive, a train song with an aching cinematic bridge that could have slipped into any Golden Age setlist and stopped hearts. On several leaves, Roy had written short dedications: for the boy with the broken guitar, for the lady at the back door who never asked for a ticket, for M, the last initial drawn with a tenderness that needed no explanation. The cloth pouch carried the quietest punch. Inside was a pocket watch, worn, warm-toned, its face hairline cracked, and behind the backplate a tiny tintype, a younger Roy, hat in hand, standing beside an older fiddler, whose name wasn't written, but whose posture echoed the teachers that shaped him. Tucked beneath the watch was a faded ribbon from an early Opry night and a torn corner of a paper ticket, on which Roy had penciled, "The night I knew the crowd would let me stay." It wasn't scandal. It wasn't a map to lost riches. It was the archive of a heart that had chosen to keep certain songs quiet until the world felt ready to hear them without chewing them into headlines. The family agreed then and there. The notebook would be carefully studied, the fragments arranged, and a selection shared in a museum exhibit titled "When the House Lights Dim: The Private Songs of Roy Acuff." The audio tape would play in a small listening room, the watch would sit in a glass case beside the locket, and the USO pass and a single page from the notebook, the soldier's prayer, would be displayed with only Roy's first name signed at the bottom, as he had left it. News of the safe's opening spread quickly, and the reaction across country music wasn't outrage or gossip, it was gratitude. Artists spoke of the comfort in discovering that even a king had drafts, doubts, and quiet devotions. Historians marveled not at the pistol or the telegrams, but at the humility of a man who'd rather guard a melody for the right moment than wring applause from the wrong one. And for fans, the revelation didn't rewrite Roy Acuff, it deepened him. The mystery safe, after 50 long years, had not unveiled a secret that would burn down the past. It offered kindling, old wood, seasoned by time, that made the present glow a little warmer. In the end, the safe closed again, empty but somehow fuller than before, its purpose complete. The curators turned out the lights, the family stepped into the hallway, and somewhere in the museum, an instrument case clicked shut with that familiar, satisfying sound. Maybe that is the last truth the safe had to give. That legacy isn't what you lock away. It's what you leave arranged so that others can find their way to the chorus. And what they found in Roy Acuff's safe after 50 years didn't stun country music by tearing its roots. It reminded the world that the roots still live, quietly, stubbornly, beneath every song that dares to last.